From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. Warren calls Fed Chair Powell a dangerous man. Sunrise Movement warns of betrayal as Pelosi bends toward corporate Democrats. Top U.S. general says Trump never intended to attack China. Taliban was and remains a terrorist organization, top U.S. general says. And China removing domes from mosques. Our top story tonight, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts on Tuesday called Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell a dangerous man to lead the U.S. Central Bank. Warren was criticizing Powell's record of weakening post-2008 Wall Street regulations. She added that this should disqualify him from serving a second term. Warren argued that Powell, who was appointed by former President Donald Trump, has taken deregulatory actions that have put taxpayers at risk for hundreds of billions of dollars. These include weakening the oversight of banks. Warren tweeted that she told Powell renominating him for another term is not a risk worth taking. The U.S. House's progressive Democrats have vowed to vote against President Joe Biden's infrastructure package when it comes up for a vote tomorrow. They want to push through the president's larger tax and social spending package before approving money for roads and bridges. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she'll move ahead with the vote. She said Democrats need to hold the line for a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. The youth-led Sunrise Movement accused Pelosi of betrayal. This is for walking back her promise to ensure Congress passes a reconciliation package before the House votes on infrastructure. Top U.S. General Mark Milley testified in the Senate on Tuesday that former President Donald Trump had no intention of attacking China. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said he made calls to his Chinese counterparts in the last months of Trump's presidency to de-escalate tensions. Calls between Milley and Chinese General Li Zuozhang were first revealed in the book Peril by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. The first call was on October 30th, 4 days before the U.S. presidential election. The second was January 8th, 2 days after Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol to prevent the certification of President Joe Biden's election victory. U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said Tuesday the Afghan war with the Taliban ended differently than how Washington wanted. Milley was speaking at a Senate hearing on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chief Frank McKenzie of U.S. Central Command were also present. Milley said the Taliban was and remains a terrorist organization that has not broken ties with al-Qaeda. The U.S., however, has not declared the Taliban to be a terrorist organization. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin acknowledged the Taliban's swift takeover of Afghanistan took military leaders by surprise. Austin was testifying before a Senate Armed Services Committee. General Mark Milley says he advised President Joe Biden in the fall of 2020 to maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. That contradicts earlier comments from President Biden that military leaders did not advise him to retain a troop presence. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki defended the U.S. withdrawal on Twitter. She said leaving 2,500 troops in Afghanistan meant escalation because of the deal struck under former President Donald Trump's administration with the Taliban. Britain's main opposition Labour Party passed a motion Monday calling for sanctions against Israel for practicing apartheid against Palestinians. The motion also calls on the centre-left party to cease the UK-Israeli arms trade in areas where it violates Palestinian rights. In addition, the motion demanded an end to trade with illegal Israeli settlements. Labour leaders agreed to support effective measures, including sanctions against Israeli government actions that are illegal under international law. Labour's youth wing brought the motion forward. Though it passed easily, the vote is not binding on the party's leadership. Labour's shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy distanced the official policy stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict from the conference motion. France on Tuesday said it would sharply reduce the number of visas granted to people from Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Government spokesman Gabriel Attal told Europe One Radio that the unprecedented decision was necessary. He accused the former French colonies of not doing enough to allow illegal migrants to return. Morocco's Foreign Minister Nasser Bourita condemned the move as unjustified. Bourita said his country has clamped down on illegal migration. Climate activist Greta Thunberg called out decades of empty words and promises from world leaders demanding action and money to tackle global warming. She was speaking ahead of a pivotal UN climate summit just weeks away. The upcoming COP26 meeting in Glasgow is seen as crucial to the viability of the Paris Climate Agreement. About 400 youth activists from nearly 200 countries are lambasting government's failure to address the climate crisis during a 3-day event in Italy this week. They are also working on proposals to tackle global warming. Artist Omar Lamzi is among a new generation of artists whose murals are changing the face of Morocco's cities. The avenues and alleyways of Morocco's seaside capital Rabat reveal an array of freshly painted works. Last week, the city showcased Jidar, Arabic for wall, a festival dedicated to street art. They include larger-than-life fantasy creatures alongside realistic portrayals and scenes of daily life. China's authorities are seeking to change mosques in the country to make them look more Chinese. They are removing dome roofs from thousands of mosques nationwide, saying they are evidence of Arab influence. In Xining, capital of the northwest Qinghai province, the Han Chinese, Hui Muslim, Tibetans, Turkic Salars, and other ethnic groups typically coexist without conflict. But the government's controversial demolition of the entrance hall of the city's famous Danguan Mosque, among the largest in China, is threatening that peace. The removal of the domes and minarets from the mosque's front gate has sparked backlash from residents. The city now is in the crosshairs of a nationwide campaign to Sinicize Islam, or in official lingo, to guide Islam to be compatible with socialism. Danguan's renovation signals the expansion of an ongoing crackdown on Islam in China. Retired NBA superstar and legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says professional basketball players who refuse to get the COVID-19 vaccine should be kicked off the team. In an article published in Rolling Stone on Saturday, Abdul-Jabbar said the NBA should insist on all players and staff being vaccinated or remove them. The 2021-2022 NBA season will begin in a few weeks without a vaccine mandate for players. The league will require unvaccinated players to submit to regular testing during practice, travel, and on game days, according to the Associated Press. Fully vaccinated athletes won't need to be tested regularly. Abdul-Jabbar converted to Islam in 1971 at the age of 24. This was the day after winning the NBA title with the Milwaukee Bucks that year. Since then, he has been a civil rights activist, as well as a speaker and writer on issues relating to race and religion in the United States. In 2016, Abdul-Jabbar was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan is seeking approval to resume investigations into Afghanistan. But now it will focus on the actions of the Taliban and the Islamic State in Khorasan province, while alleged U.S. crimes take a backseat. Khan said with developments since the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan last month, war crimes are no longer likely to be investigated properly. A lawyer representing alleged victims of U.S. torture in Afghanistan was reportedly stunned after Khan's announcement. The ICC has spent 15 years looking into alleged war crimes in Afghanistan, launching a full investigation last year. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon,
they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch. Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the issue of China removing the domes from mosques, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. I'll be talking today with Peter Irwin, who is with the Uyghur Human Rights Project, about the news which has come out that whatever China was doing in Xinjiang or Eastern Turkestan is being expanded to the rest of China. And this seems to go on with China without anybody stopping them. Of course, in America, our government is speaking and talking about it. We are working on it, but this scheme seems to go on. So let's welcome Peter Irwin.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Muslim Network TV. Peter Irwin is Senior Program Officer for Advocacy and Communication at the Uyghur Human Rights Project in Washington, D.C., and he authored a report recently about what's happening to imams in Xinjiang or Eastern Turkestan. Tell me, what is this news about China going around demolishing domes? Do they have nothing else to do in life?
It seems so. So one thing that came out, I think, just recently this week or a couple of weeks ago is that we found that the dome and minarets from one of the largest mosques in China, the Dongguan Mosque in Xining. It's a Hui mosque. It's not a Uyghur mosque, which gives you a sense of the sort of the campaign that's going on now. So they didn't demolish the entire mosque, but if you look at side-by-side photos, they took off the big green dome on top and they've demolished the minarets. So essentially, it simply looks like a Chinese building now. It's part of a long-standing campaign, a sort of Sinicization campaign to Sinicize religion, to remove some of these significant elements of Islam in particular, but also all religion across China. In this case, they're simply demolishing or destroying, the most obvious aspects, the most visual aspects of Islam. Again, it started with Uyghurs. I think it's much more intense when it comes to Uyghurs, and we can speak about that. But in the Hui case, you see this campaign ramping up even more. Hui, for the most part, have not, they've faced government repression before. They've been careful to stay in the bounds of what the rules are, I suppose. But you see the Chinese government going much further in the Hui case these days.
Let's define who are the Hui people.
So Hui, who number about 10 million, I think Uyghurs number, by comparison, about 12 million. Hui, there's about 10 million of them. They reside in regions in Western China, not predominantly in Xinjiang or East Turkestan where Uyghurs reside, but in sort of the central Western provinces. So Gansu, Xinhai, other places essentially. They, in some ways, have not borne the brunt of some of the repressive policies. Most of them are, if not all of them, they all speak Chinese. They look, in appearance, they look Chinese. They haven't had sort of some of this kind of history with, the East Turkestan republics in the 30s and 40s, for example. There's been less repression, less force from the Chinese government towards them because, they try to sort of go along with the Chinese Communist Party as much as they can, but they are Muslims themselves, right? So they have started to sort of see some of this repression sneaking in. Uyghurs have been detained en masse. Hui have not really seen, there's a couple individual cases of Hui who had been detained in these camps, but not so much. And again, we see this as a sort of an extension of the campaign against Islam in general.
So, Peter, will it be appropriate to say that Hui are essentially Chinese Muslims?
So I know there's sort of controversy around using this kind of term. Sometimes the press erroneously will call Uyghurs Chinese Muslims, and they don't like that too much. That's not really what they see themselves as, Uyghurs in particular. Hui, I haven't had too much association or communication with Hui themselves, but in some ways, yes, they could be identified, I suppose, as Chinese Muslim. Again, they're Chinese and they speak the language. They don't have their own such a distinct culture, I would say, as the Uyghurs do. And they're not a Turkic people as well. They're sort of more separate in that way.
So they're not Turkic people, but they are Han Chinese, except that they have accepted Islam as their faith. Now, this particular province where these things are being reported, Qinghai, it borders Xinjiang. So could one consider that, okay, from Xinjiang they're expanding to bordering area, or it is going to go all around?
So I suspect in some ways, yes, it's expanding in some ways, but there has been pressure, as I mentioned, on the Hui community in the past. There has been pressure specifically, and there have been actually protests. There's just one element we should think about. Uyghurs are not able to protest. There are sort of small-scale demonstrations in 2012, 2013, 2014, but that really ended. Uyghurs who go out to protest or protest anything will be arrested immediately. Hui, on the other hand, over the past few years, we've actually seen large-scale protests, and there have been protests in terms, peaceful in front of the mosques because they were protesting the demolition of some of them or the changes that have been made. I wouldn't say that the Chinese government is going to take this same approach to the Hui. I don't think they see them as threatening, I suppose. I think they will continue to push and do things like destroying mosques, or at least removing what they call the Arabic elements of mosques, I suppose. And I think they know the Hui are not going to push back against it. But my presumption here and what I've seen on the ground is that I don't think that they're going to do the same thing. They're not going to go as far as, detaining 10% or 20% of the population. They haven't targeted imams in the same way, for example, which we can also speak about.
Could it be essentially the anti-ethnic move? Because Qinghai province also has 45% of ethnic minorities, Tibetans, Hui, and some Uyghur and some Salars. Could it be extension of suppressing the ethnic population as compared to people, say, who are living in Tianjin or Beijing?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think it's very important to understand that although the Chinese government has targeted Islam and religion in general, but I think Uyghur Islam or Kazakh Islam, Muslims themselves, they targeted them much more intensely. It's not specifically necessarily about religion. It's about the role that religion plays in society and the role that Islam plays for Uyghurs, for example. I think it is based on an ethnicity, which goes, of course, beyond religion. There's religion and there's the language they speak. There's the customs and culture, for example, that they're cracking down on as well. So it's not repression necessarily because of Islam. It's what Islam means. It's sort of it's an alternative source of authority, I suppose, or people look to religion, they look to God rather than the Communist Party. So I think that is accurate. So not only Uyghurs, but the so-called ethnic minorities in these regions, I think they're absolutely focused on. They were focused on Tibet. They're still focused on Tibet, but now they're more focused on East Turkestan and the Uyghurs, in addition to the other groups that are based in this region. Yeah.
Romans might have a problem calling domes to be Arabian part of architecture because, the dome on a mosque is sort of a universal thing now, but it was not originally Arab. I think it came from Roman and all that civilization borrow from each other. Are there other structures in China which might have a dome, but they are not a mosque?
Well, absolutely. It's a good point because I was just in London last week, and you look at St. Paul's Cathedral, for example. It has a dome that, you might say, well, the Chinese government might want to demolish it, but it's really about what the dome represents in terms of Islam, for example, for Uyghurs or Hui or others. So how does the dome represent aspects of religion for Uyghurs themselves, and what do the minarets say, for example, as well? So maybe not so much about what the actual structure itself, it's about what it means and how it might be seen by, Uyghurs themselves as a representation of Islam.
Now, this Dangon Mosque, whose images are going around, although they are doing it to other mosques also, this is pretty historic mosque. It was established in 1380, and it has gone through, of course, several reconstruction and things like that. But what happened to that idea of preserving historical places and cultural places? It has a board even there that it is a historical cultural site.
Well, I think from the perspective of the Chinese government, this is preservation in some ways. So you actually see that, for example, in the Uyghur region, you get these mosques that are being destroyed, thousands, right? So the Australian Strategic Policy Institute has a report on this. UHRP has looked into this as well in its own report on destruction of mosques. And their justification is to say, look, we're modernizing these buildings. We're not destroying them. We're actually improving them. And they improve them in such a way that at the same time they can say, we have the mosques, but we're also preserving, cultural buildings and elements in the region. That's one key aspect of the campaign, I would say, is that we have to keep in mind. I don't think that the Chinese government is intent on eliminating Islam in general. What they're trying to do is they're trying to basically strangle it, to choke it down to the point where it's not really recognizable to Uyghurs, for example, or Kazakhs, to the point where it's acceptable to the Chinese government. It sort of conforms to their version of what a cultural expression might be. In the Uyghur case, yes, as you mentioned, in the Hui case of this mosque, it's a 14th century mosque. For Uyghurs, there's several mosques that were close to 1,000 years old, if not, older, and they had been renovated and changed over time, but they demolished them. And that, it says a lot about where the country is going, I suppose, and how they regard history, or history that doesn't, conform to the Chinese Communist Party.
One thing seems to be clear in Xinjiang. I myself have seen from my eyes the destroyed mosques. They're completely destroying mosques in large scale, as compared to rest of the China, where they're making the architectural changes, like there's no dome or no minaret. I saw some photos of before and after. There was a marketplace. It was a sort of a bazaar, but for some reason, for promotion of to tourists or something, it has this minaret. It is a marketplace, but it has minarets and domes and all that. Then I saw those get destroyed as well. So is there a very clear differentiation that in Xinjiang, a large number of mosques are completely destroyed as compared to other parts?
Yeah, absolutely. And this came out of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's report. They found that 30% of the mosques across the entire region, we're talking, 25,000 or so mosques, 30% had been completely destroyed. Just completely destroyed. Not just simply taking the domes off or removing these supposed Arabic elements or Islamic elements of the mosque. 1/3 of all mosques were totally destroyed, and they found that about 65% were either destroyed or damaged. So they might, for example, destroy the gatehouse, which of course the gatehouse itself is the most clear representation, or from an outside observer, for Uyghurs themselves, that is the most architecturally interesting and often the oldest elements of the mosque, the building itself. They might keep the prayer hall, for example, but they might destroy the gatehouse and other elements. And then beyond that, it's not just mosques, right? You can talk about this in a broader context of the destruction of things like graveyards, the destructions of shrines. The Uyghurs have shrines across the region, they've been destroyed. And also markers along the road to shrines. So again, and this is why, as I mentioned, it's not simply about Islam, it's about the culture. So Islam is central to Uyghur culture, and Uyghurs are themselves primarily, they're mostly Muslim. It's about essentially undercutting the most significant elements of that culture. And Islam, of course, plays a very central role in that.
So what are the other examples of they going after other religious architecture in China?
Well, you see this in terms of crosses being taken down from churches. So again, China has this thing called the Regulation on Religious Affairs, and there's very interesting amendments made in 2017 that sort of closes space for religious practice. So you see this, they're cracking down on Christian house churches. So, private churches that operate underground essentially. But again, in terms of the imagery, you see the removal of crosses absolutely as well. Perhaps not on not such a wide scale, I suppose. They aren't necessarily destroying all these buildings themselves, but yeah, they're definitely targeting religious symbols in general across the country.
Peter, you have done a study of what is happening to imams, although we are talking about what's happening to mosque, but imams are an integral part of running the mosque. Could you share some of your findings on that?
Sure. So I completed this really, 2020, 2021. We were basically, we're doing two things. We were speaking to imams in the diaspora. We spoke to 5 imams in Turkey, Uyghur imams who had practiced in the region, who ended up fleeing. They told us their story about what actually happened, what they experienced. The other half of the report was us compiling a data set based on, evidence that we have gathered overseas from several different databases. We had a data set of 1,000 cases of Uyghur, and primarily Uyghur, but about 17% Kazakh as well, imams or religious figures or people central to the mosque or religious life, religious leadership in the region who have been detained. So about 1,046 cases of Uyghur imams or Kazakh imams who have been detained or imprisoned or disappeared for essentially being imams themselves. Of those cases, the most interesting aspect is that they're really targeting these figures very harshly. So 40% of the cases for which there was information on sentencing, rather, I should say that of the 1,000 cases, there were 300 or so where we have sentencing data for those prison sentences. Of those 300 cases, 95% of those cases were over 5 years in prison, 20% over 20 years in prison. If you look at the data on, what actually these people are being sentenced for, it's, pretty absurd charges. Simply being an imam in the Uyghur region has been essentially criminalized. And I'll say one other thing. There is, of course, as you mentioned, a direct connection between the mosque and the imam, obviously. But what the Chinese government is trying to do and what they've been doing over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, 5 to 6 years, maybe beginning in 2014, is that they are criminalizing Islam outside, or Islam for Uyghurs outside of state-sanctioned mosques that are led by state-approved imams. Imams in the region have to be approved by the government. Very strict process, highly repressive. The government essentially writes the sermons completely of the imam. They actually, primarily, imams are being used now, the ones who have been not swept up by this campaign, they're being used as an instrument from the government to essentially explain government policy and national laws to their congregations, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that they're constricting Islam on a number of levels. You can only practice Islam, this is the really key point, in state-approved mosques, state-sanctioned mosques, which are dwindling in number because they're being destroyed, led by these state-approved imams. They're also dwindling in number because they're being arrested or dying in prison, and they're being highly controlled. So that's essentially the state of Islam for Uyghurs in the region today.
Well, thank you so much, Peter Irvine, for your time, and appreciate your work.
Thank you so much.
Back to you, Samana.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.